Hi, Keith. Thanks for joining us tonight. We'll start in just a few minutes.
Find your seats. All right. Well, I wanted to start by welcoming everybody for joining us on Veterans Day. We're grateful for the museum for opening up the space for us, despite them otherwise being closed. And I want to acknowledge that we have many Audubon members who have served. And so I want to thank our veterans that are amongst us. I know Mary and Jim are amongst them. I'm sure there's many others as well. But thank you for your service. I have about like 10 minutes of announcements, and then we're going to hand it over to Hannah for our appropriately November-themed turkey talk. As you all know, we have bird outings most weekends. The best way to find them is on our website or on our meetup page, and you can RSVP on our meetup page for most of those. I have a few fall conservation reminders. So the first one is Leave Your Leaves. We have a Leave Your Leaves campaign going on right now. But if you leave your leaves this fall, it creates habitat, helps feed birds and other wildlife. It'll also slow down stormwater runoff, saves you money, and best of all, it means we'll get more fireflies and moths and butterflies and that sort of thing next year. So leave your leaves. And we got a $1,000 grant from the city of Raleigh to create these yard signs that Mary is showing. So they are free to you. If you want one, come find Mary afterwards and we can get you one. We also have fall migrations starting to tail off, but we encourage people to leave their lights off from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. Through November 30th. We also have lights out yard signs if you're interested. Anne, who is manning the door, will be back up here later, but you can talk to her and she'll get you signs. And we encourage you to leave those up all year. So no reason to take it down just for between migrations. All right, and then I have a few volunteer opportunities I want to. Did you have something, Jim? No? All right. A few volunteer opportunities I wanted to flag. So this Friday, we're going to be installing bluebird nest boxes on a trail at Mount Hope Cemetery. It's from 9 a.m. to noon this Friday. If you're interested, there is a registration link. It's through the city. Or you can find me or Mary Abrams afterwards. We can help you get connected to it. We also have an invasive plant removal coming up. It's on November 20th in Fuquay Varina, the Carol Howard Johnson Environmental Education Park. So that is not this Thursday, but next Thursday morning from 9 to 11. If you want to sign up for that, you can find it on our meetup page and let us know that you plan on coming. And then it's a little bit further off, but we got the Christmas bird count coming up. It's going to be Saturday, December 20th. If you are interested, you're going to want to contact Brian O'Shea. We'll drop his email into the chat, or if you need that information, come find me afterwards. We can get it to you. And then in January, we have astronomy days coming up here at the museum, January 24th and 25th, and we need some volunteers to help man our table at the astronomy days. So if you're interested in that, come find me, and I'll also connect you with Anne, our advocacy chair, who's taking that on for us. All right, lastly, we are an all-volunteer organization, as you all know. That includes the board. And so we have a number of different leadership positions that are open right now. We are looking for people to help out with communications and advocacy. As always, we need someone to help run our Lights Out campaign. And then we also need board members. So I'm going to share here in just a minute our slate for the board that would start in 2026. Board members serve 1-year terms, and we'll vote on the next board at our December board meeting. I don't know why this isn't working. John, do I have to hit a button somewhere? Wait, the screen come back on. So we are still recruiting for board members. If you're interested in learning more about it, come find me afterwards. Board members commit and other volunteer leaders commit probably about 4 to 10 hours. Oh, there it is.
All I do is get close. I just have to get close.
4 to 10 hours a month, depending on kind of what the position is or what you're doing. So most importantly, this is our board for next year. You will notice right away that we don't have anyone who's volunteered to be our president yet. So if you're interested, please let me know. The presidency is normally a 2-year term, but we can also arrange for like a 1-year term if it fits people's lifestyle better. Otherwise, we have a couple people rolling off the board, and we have 2 new board members that will be coming onto the board depending on the vote on in December. One is Matt Flores. Matt's with us today. Say hi. Please talk to Matt afterwards, get to know him a little bit more, and I'll give him a chance to say a little bit more about why he wants to join the board when we do our vote. And Royce Marcus as well, who some of you know, he's been volunteering in a variety of different capacities with us. So that's great, but we are always happy to have more board members and volunteer leaders. Then the last thing I'll say is if it's your first time joining us today, Wake Audubon always offers for first timers that we will pay for your Audubon membership for the next year. That includes membership in the National Audubon Society as well as in the North Carolina and Wake Audubon Society. So if you're interested in that, thank you. Yeah, we'll take us up on that deal. We'll gather your contact information at the end if you're interested. So come find me or another board member and we'll capture it. All right, with that, I am done with my announcements. Anything I missed from my fellow board members?
Sorry.
Yeah, I did start that way. Yes. Thank you for flagging it. All right, then Hannah? John, are you introducing? All right, I think we're good.
Well, the technology is working. Welcome, everyone. It's always a pleasant surprise when the tech is working. Let's keep it that way. It's an extra treat to introduce Hannah. I love how these things kind of play out, a little serendipity. Her boss, it turns out, was my first graduate student. So I said, I've got intel for you that you can maybe use to get, little extra resources there for your job. So we'll talk after. Yeah, her boss was great to have as that first graduate student. Hannah is Upland, as you can see, Upland game bird biologist. She did college work. She's been working at Pennsylvania. And what was the name of that college?
Penn State.
It was Penn State. She then went to Clemson for graduate work. Oh, we got some Penn State fans here. So, and then she went to Clemson. Clemson does a lot of wildlife biology work. They have a lot of students. She is now the biologist here with North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission. And she is with Upland game would include things like woodcock, American woodcock, or the northern bobwhite. And tonight we've merged November, Thanksgiving, and a wonderful topic for the wild turkey. I brought some specimens. You're welcome to come up afterwards. And there are some wings here. You can pick them up, hold them. A spread tail is attached to the wing. And the specimen here, the laying down one is more of a Midwestern one, and the mounted bird is more of a Southeast one. They look a little different, but you can come up and afterwards when you want to ask Hannah some questions or ask the turkey. It's sort of like an oracle, you know. But anyway, please give me welcome for Hannah, who will talk to us about wild turkeys tonight. Welcome.
All righty, thank you for having me, everybody. As John said, my name is Hannah Plumpton, and I'm the Upland game bird biologist. So I am in charge of monitoring and managing the ruffed grouse, wild turkey, and bobwhite quail for the people of North Carolina. And we're going to talk today about one of those species, the wild turkey, and kind of its conservation success story, and a little bit about how we currently monitor and manage turkeys here in North Carolina. And it's apt because it is that November and Thanksgiving is in a few weeks. And, you know, we always think about turkeys and Thanksgiving, especially the first one, when we're actually not sure that turkeys were actually at that first Thanksgiving. Historically, there's only been reported of fowl, which typically refers to waterfowl, not turkeys. So the iconic bird of Thanksgiving may have not even been at the first Thanksgiving. All right, let's see. We can get this to move for me. There we go. We're going to start back in the, let me clear that out and see if I can move this, minimize that down for me. Thank you. I'm sure there is. Thank you.
And it'll advance if you want.
Awesome.
The red form that advances. If you want. Or you can just do it on.
That works too. So we're going to start back in the 1840s and prior pre-colonial time period. Turkeys were really plentiful across the eastern United States. And, you know, I'm not sure if everyone knows this, but Ben Franklin had even considered possibly the turkey as a national bird. You know, when the bald eagle was chosen, he wasn't very fond of them since they're a scavenger bird and often stealing from other wildlife. He didn't consider that be a dignified bird to represent the United States and thought the turkey was a better representation. Although it was a vain bird, it had higher moral character, in his opinion. So as we move forward in time, we get into the 1850s through the 1899. This is what us conservationists call the period of exploitation. This is really when natural resources seemed endless. And we took advantage of these never-ending seeming resources. And so we harvested timber and had large things for shipbuilding across the world, basically from our forests. Charcoal was big, so we cut forests down and they just kept going until they ended. This led to massive deforestation. You know, there was unregulated harvest of wildlife and basically market hunting. So when people went to the butcher to get their turkey, it wasn't your butterball turkey, it was wild turkeys that hunters went out and just shot whole flocks of for all wildlife. You went to your butcher shop, and if you wanted venison, there was fresh venison and stuff, and they all got it with no regulation. So this led to the severe decline of many game species, but it also led to the decline of many other species because women's fashion was a big thing. Wearing feathers or whole birds on their hats was very in vogue, which led to a lot of decline of our wading birds and several other species. It was also in fashion to collect eggs and have egg collections. So not only were we harvesting these birds in a rate that they couldn't sustain, we were hindering their reproduction. So they were losing on two different fronts. And at the same time period of this, we also fought a very drastic civil war, which caused great damage to things. So there's a lot of other things going on, but a lot going on in our time period. The early 1900s is really when conservation really began in its infancy. You know, the U.S. Forest Service was created. We first signed our migratory bird treaty with Canada. the Audubon Society was first formed. But at that same time period, you know, the wild turkey was pretty much gone from North Carolina. And that's due to those two main reasons of uncontrolled year-round market hunting and massive deforestation. We have this lovely picture of what was Pisgah National Forest. As you can see, it's a whole lot of stumps. So we moving forward through the 1920s and 40s is really when we first started to manage for turkeys and attempt to restore turkey populations to higher numbers than that they were. And so we had our first season for turkeys. You know, you can see one of our old Rules Digest out here from 1933, but we had a very long season. It was 3 months. It was either sex, male or female, a very generous bag limit of 5 birds. And we also attempted to restore wild turkey populations through artificial propagation, where we raised birds until they were adults and then released them into the wild, where we hoped that they would create and just habituate to the wild and reproduce naturally. And as you can see, kind of our distribution in the 1940s, it's pretty isolated pockets of forests or of turkeys. You know, they're in the green, they're in our isolated pockets and are some of our heavy swampy river basins and bottoms, very hard to reach areas. You know, we have whole sections of the state where there weren't any turkeys. And, you know, we did this propagation for, you know, 20 years, from the 20s all the way through the 40s. And we kept that really long season, but even so, you know, our hunting season kept kind of going down, or turkeys kept going down. You know, it was only open in about 15 states out of 100 counties, only 15 counties were still open for turkey season. We had done some changes throughout our turkey season, but still pretty limited across the state. But what we did learn was our artificial propagation, releasing these farm bred birds that not only the state released, but hunt clubs and private landowners released as well. Thousands and thousands of these birds. Well, that was kind of an epic failure. It turns out that when you raise pen-reared birds, they don't have the natural instincts to exist in the wild. And what I like to say, they're not nearly as paranoid as they need to be in the wild. So they were kind of easy food for elsewhere. So they weren't really reproducing and being successful. So in the late 1940s, we established what we called wild turkey refuges. These were areas, we had about 4 across the state that were stronghold. We still had strong turkey populations. And we said, okay, nobody can hunt here. We're keeping this population. We want to save it. And we heavily manage these areas to keep these turkey populations strong. Because in the 1950s, after we abandoned that propagation stuff, we said, okay, we're going to trap these wild birds in these refuges, and we're going to restore them and take them to a different part of the state, which has what we believe is good habitat, and release them there. And so what we did that was we created some nice walk-in traps, and hopefully the birds were supposed to go in the traps. You know, they don't always do what they're supposed to do. It was really painfully slow. And they're actually, because they're paranoid, were a lot more difficult to trap than we expected. So we didn't move a lot of birds in the 1950s, but what birds we did move, we moved to the mountains to restore them. As we worked into the 60s, you know, the progress in this restoration period, it's very slow. We switched from our walk-in traps, we switched to cannon nets, which the waterfowl folks have been using to catch ducks. So that was more successful. And then we were also using capture drugs where, you know, they'd eat immobilization chemicals in food, and it would cause them to go to sleep, which would allow us to transport them. But we really reached a low point in our turkey populations in about 1970. We estimate that there was only 2,000 birds. So even though we've been trying to restore turkeys from the 1940s or 20s, they've still been declining until they reached that absolute low point in 1970. And during the same time period, despite these complaints from our hunters, we still had these really long fall seasons, and those were basically not the season, and the season structure was not helpful for turkeys. So in 1970, North Carolina said, we're going to make a change. So we reached out to the well-known turkey biologist, Wayne Bailey from West Virginia, who had restored the turkey population in West Virginia, and said, Wayne, we really need your help. Please come help us. And Wayne was kind enough to come to North Carolina and help restore our turkey population, really jumpstart our restoration. So we closed fall seasons and initiated our first spring gobbler season in 1972. This was vastly opposed by everybody. They said, no way, this is going to be horrible to our turkey population. You know, males are out in the springtime, they're interested in breeding, they're not really focused, we're gonna just decimate the population. Well, they weren't right, because we still have a spring season basically the way it's been initiated since 1972, and our turkeys have dramatically improved. So Wayne was right. But he gave our restoration efforts a nice kick start, and we really started ramping up our restoration and translocating our turkeys. And what we did was we established very strict guidelines for our release dates. They had to meet certain criteria and be managed ways to ensure the biggest potential for success for restoring these turkeys. We didn't want to put all this time and effort to move turkeys to have them fail. We wanted to make sure that we were going to give them success. And so in the 1970s, in a single decade, we went from about 2,000 turkeys to about 7,500 turkeys. So we're on the upswing, all by basically changing a season. So good for us. In the 1980s, we picked up on our relocations. We not only began to relocate birds to public lands, but we also started on private lands as well. They had to assign agreements and have certain barriers and restrictions, but we did. And we also began to relocate outside the mountains into all 3 regions across the state. Restoration sites were strictly evaluated, chosen based on potential. If they were on private land, they had to sign an agreement. They couldn't hunt turkeys for a set number of years, allowing them to get established. We switched from our cannon nets to rocket nets, which were similar, but smaller rockets versus the cannons, so less black powders and safer to use. We also became more efficient at using our capture drugs, narrowing things down and get better, some trial and error learning. So, because we were successful at restoring turkeys in the 70s, we had more source populations rather than just those 4 turkey refuges. We had more places that we could trap birds and help locate them across the state. And we really started building momentum. We captured 800 turkeys within our state and moved them in a single decade. And then we also had turkeys trapped, about 135 trapped out of state and brought in to help us, because turkeys weren't just down in North Carolina, they were down everywhere. So everybody was helping each other out. Now, mostly we paid each other money to translocate turkeys, but there were a couple deals we made, and they always make me smile when we hear some of these deals with other states. But here in the 1980s, we made a trade with West Virginia. They gave us 37 turkeys, and we sent them 20 river otters. So it's always a fun thing. There aren't more of these deals because it's hard to equate how many turkeys equal how many river otters or bobcats or trout fry and all that sort of stuff. But those always make me smile. And then our statewide turkey population, we estimated that it almost quadrupled in this last decade. So we're up to 28,000 birds. We're going up. So these are some of our restoration sites that we did from the 50s through the 80s. You know, the blue stars are kind of in the mountains. We only had 7 sites over 20 years. In the 70s, you know, we had mostly in the mountains, but a Piedmont site, and we had 20. And then through the 80s, we picked all around the state, and we're up to 50 sites. So we're picking up speed. The 90s is where we really peaked in turkey restoration, which, if you think about, wasn't all that long ago. It's only about 30 years ago. 35, if we want to go all the way to 1990. So that's not long, you know. But we chose into rocket nets were our capture method of choice, and that's still the method of choice we use today to capture turkeys. We really intensified our trapping effort. We captured over 2,000 turkeys and had over, 1,600 come from other states. And then we made that second trade with West Virginia. Again, they gave us 150 turkeys and we sent them 100 river otters. And so we had relocation sites all across the state. And again, through the 90s, we estimated that we are up to over 130,000, which is a lot considering, remember, in 1970, we only had 2,000. So turkeys have dramatically increased. So we're on a great success path here. So in 2000, 25 years ago, we called the primary phase of restoration complete. Our secondary phase was complete in 2005, and we're saying we're done moving turkeys. Turkeys are restored. Everywhere else, they're going to expand across the state naturally. Now, I kind of want to remind people that turkeys would have rebounded naturally across the state. They would have expanded naturally. It would have taken them probably a couple hundred years. So we just hit the fast forward button and said, yeah, we're going to do this in a few decades. It took a whole lot of time, dedication, and effort. And one of my predecessors basically spent a large portion of his career getting up really early, capturing turkeys and transporting turkeys and driving late into the night, moving them all across the state and coordinating them, other people moving these turkeys all across the state. I don't get to do nearly as much fun things. I get to sit on my computer, but it was a fun time and a great time for turkey restoration. So to wrap up the world of restoration here in North Carolina was in more than 5 decades of effort, we've relocated over 6,000 birds. Over 4,000 were relocated within the state, and then nearly 2,000 we received from other states and relocated around. And these weren't just our neighboring states. These came from Wisconsin and Connecticut and Florida and Texas. These birds came from all over. So as you can see, those red stars are 276 sites that we moved in 15 years. So we really jacked it up and we moved them everywhere in the state. So we are successful in having turkeys in all 100 counties of the state. And in the post 35-ish, 25-ish years, post-restoration, they're all in the 100, and turkey populations, while not nearly as increasing as quite as quickly, have been slowly and steadily increasing, that we estimate there's about 270,000 in the state. It's a long way from just 2,000. So our statewide population is stable to slightly increasing. So we have been a success story. And turkeys are restored. We find them in 49 states, all except Alaska, a few Canadian provinces. So turkeys have made a comeback. And people of my age, turkeys have always been common, but, as John said, my predecessor, it was quite a while before he saw his first turkey. And when he saw his first turkey as an adult, he went, what the heck is that? Because he wasn't even thinking it would be a turkey, because it was so off his radar. So I've talked about the restoration. Why don't we talk about a little bit about the turkey themselves? So turkeys are sexually dimorphic, which means we can tell them apart by their sex. So our males, adult males, are often called toms or gobblers, and they're a big boy. They're about 16 to 24 pounds. They are typically bearded, which is that protrusion from the center of their chest. They have bright iridescent feathers, and they have large, brightly colored heads, particularly in the springtime. You'll really see that red, white, and blue of their heads, so they're quite patriotic. Another win for them to be the national bird. They also have spurs on their legs. In comparison, our females or hens are about half the size of our males. They're only about 8 to 10 pounds. She is rarely bearded. They're rarely bearded, only about 10%, although I have 2 bearded hen photos. She's much drabber than her male counterpart. She's brown, more subdued. She has a grayish blue head with a few feathers, and she doesn't have any spurs on her legs. Now, we can tell adults from juveniles through visual things from a distance. We can do a couple in hand, but visually, this is handy. So we can tell what we call our 1-year-old birds. And I'm going to say this in terms of our males because that's people are out hunting, they're going for the males. And they typically want adults, the way we tell them apart from a distance is through tail feathers. So turkeys have 5,000 to 6,000 feathers, and they molt them on a routine schedule. So our jakes or our juvenile birds that are 1-year-old, so they were born the previous spring, when they start molting their feathers, particularly their tail feathers, they start from the center and work their way out. Well, their adult feathers are longer than their juvenile feathers, so it kind of gives them this wonky looking tail fan here. Compared to the adults, which it's nice and even and looks elegant, there's some growing pains with the juvenile and his tail fan. Another way as we can tell is their beard length. So beards are actually modified feathers that grow continuously through the male's life. They'll start in the fall of their hatching year, so about 6 months after they were hatched. And so when they get into their 1-year-old first spring, it's still a stubby little beard. It's less than 7 inches, around 4 or 5 inches. Comparatively to an adult, or those 2-year-old and older birds, where they're hanging down, they're closer to 9, 10 inches, possibly 11 inches. And you'll sometimes hear some people refer to them as long beards because the beard is hanging down. Now, they don't get much longer than 11 inches, despite them continuously growing, is because those ends are constantly being worn off. If they're leaning over to feed, they're dragging on the ground, or walking through brush, those ends are getting worn off. So they max out around 10, 11 inches. Let's go through the year of a turkey. What are they going through? In the springtime, late winter, spring, early spring, turkeys are in flocks, and they're trying to figure out who is the most dominant bird. They have a hierarchy within their flocks. The males will have a hierarchy with all the males, and the females will. So they'll have a pecking order, pun intended. And so they got to figure this out. So they know who the most dominant bird is all the way to the least dominant. And just because you were more dominant than me yesterday doesn't mean you're more dominant than me today. So they're always testing. And this is really important because the most dominant males, top few, they're going to do the majority of the breeding. So that's very important. And our top dominant hens, well, they get first choice at breeding, which means they get to choose where all the best nesting sites are. So they have the most potential to successfully hatch a nest. So once we have all this ranking and done through, there'll be a displaying and there'll be actual fighting. There'll be feathers flying. We'll have this dominance break out. And our males, they're going to gobble. They're going to tell the hens all around, hey, here I am. I'm handsome. Come find me. And the ladies, if they're interested, they'll come in and come see him. And he'll go into this classic display, spread out his tail fan, puff his feathers out, drag his wings, showing off to the ladies. And if they're interested, they'll do a brief courtship or a brief copulation. And then the males, they go on their merry way. They're done. They hang out with a bachelor buddy or two all year for the rest of the year. That's their only play in breeding. Females, on the other hand, well, they're just getting started with all the hard work. So she is going to nest on the ground. She'll dig a shallow depression, hide it in some vegetation and cover, and she'll lay an egg a day until she has a full clutch, around a dozen. And once they're all laid, she'll start incubating. And she'll only leave the nest to do short recesses, use the restroom, grab some quick food. But otherwise, she's on her nest. And this is her most vulnerable time period, is sitting on this nest. Because normally at night, she'd be sitting in a tree, roosted, away from limiting the predators who can get her. When she's on the ground, she is a sitting turkey rather than a sitting duck. But she is open to being predated, and a lot of them do lose their life attempting to reproduce. If she is lucky and successfully hatches her nest, after those 28 days, she has what we call baby turkeys, or what we call turkey poults. And a group of turkey poults or poults is what we call a brood. So I'll use poult and brood. So poults are born precocial. So like chickens, they're born with their eyes open, fluffy down. They're up and walking within hours of hatching, which is very good because they are absolutely snack size for lots of predators. So they need to be up and moving and looking for food, which is primarily insects, because they need that high protein diet. They need to grow quickly, so they're getting out of snack size very quickly and growing several sets of feathers. Now, their first couple weeks of life are their most vulnerable time period. They can't fly, so they have to roost on the ground at night with mom. Again, they are snack size. They also can't thermoregulate their own body temperature, which means they're extremely vulnerable to extreme heat and extreme weather events. So it's a hard life being a baby turkey. But once they hit those 10, 14 days, they've got their flight feathers, they can do short hopping flights, they can get off the ground at night, and then their survival rate goes significantly up. So once they do that and then get through this summer, we get to our fall and winter. Turkeys are starting to flock up into groups. Our males will hang out together in a bachelor group, and then our females and young of the year will hang out in a second group. These flocks can be typically 30 to 40, upwards of 100 birds. This is helpful for a couple different reasons. One, they are a prey species, so lots of eyes looking for predators. And also, it's the lean time of year, so lots of eyes looking for food. So that, in a nutshell, is a year of a turkey. So they have pretty big home ranges. You know, to meet all their needs on a daily basis, they can cover hundreds of acres just to meet that. And to meet all their needs on an annual basis, they need maybe a few thousand acres. So that's a lot bigger than people really think. It all depends on how the habitat is all laid out naturally. But their ideal habitat is really a mixture of a bunch of different habitat types. It's mature forest, young forest, old fields, agricultural fields, you know, a variety of things all closely tied together and mixed in is really ideal for them. And this can look differently, you know, in our Piedmont region versus our mountain region, all the way down to our coastal region. You know, all that habitat looked different, but all had different variety of types, and they all thrive in them. So they're not as particular as their grouse and quail cousins. They're a little bit more fussy than our turkeys, because our turkeys are more what we call generalists. So they're a bit more on the opportunistic things. So they eat a variety of food. They do your typical acorns, beets, nuts, and berries in the fall. Spring, they'll do grasses, agricultural scraps, insects, new growth, shoots, buds. Or summer, they'll do grasses and sedges, clovers, insects, summer fruits. If an insect or a lizard runs in front of them, they're not going to turn that down. So they're quite taking advantage of what's available. And this is a really big part of how we've managed to not only restore the wild turkey, but grow the wild turkey is through actively managing their habitats. And this is through a variety of different methods. This is active forest management, prescribed burning, spraying of invasive species or undesirable species, having field borders, having wildlife friendly species such as oaks versus our maples, which are not nearly as wildlife friendly in terms of food sources. So it's been a lot of work to restore, but also grow the turkey population, and something we still actively do today. Now, I mentioned turkeys are a prey species, and from the moment they are laid as an egg, something wants to eat them. This includes, your snakes, your corvids, such as crows and blue jays, your skunks, raccoons, all the way through adulthood, where you got your great horned owls, your coyotes, your bobcats, all attempting to eat them. But of course, the most successful predator is us humans. We are the best predators for turkeys, particularly our adult male turkeys. We account for 50% of their mortality. And we know a lot of this through monitoring. My job is to monitor their populations to make sure we still have really good populations now in their decades and hopefully a few hundred years into the future. So we do this through a variety of different methods, through couple harvest metrics, through summer wild turkey observation surveys, through our deer hunters. We do this from a variety of different sources throughout the year. One way is our reported harvest, which is exactly what it is. When a hunter harvests a turkey in North Carolina, they are required by law to tell us that they harvest a turkey. And as you can see, we've gone from 1977, where there was only a few hundred birds, through in the last few years, we've been averaging on around 22,000 to 23,000 birds. Now remember, we still estimate that there's 270,000 birds. So they're about a whole lot more birds, and we're taking a very small percentage of them. But it's gone a good way, grown a long way since when we first started. And as our turkey population became more prevalent across the landscape, became more available for our hunters to harvest turkeys, and then the harvest reflects that. Another way we do it is through our summer wild turkey observation survey. This is one where anyone can participate. All they need is an agency customer ID number, so we know where to send postcards to. So it's an annual survey. It occurs from July 1 to August 31st. And what we do is we ask people as they go about their normal daily lives, they see a turkey, tell us. It's all we ask. We ask them, how many hens did you see? How many poults? How many gobblers? Or how many unknown ones? And from that survey, we get a really good indication of reproduction. We get overall productivity through the poults per hen. And if you hear any sort of number from the summer turkey, it's normally this number. It's what people want who are very obsessed with turkeys. That's the number they want to know. We get an indication of poult survival, nesting success, and we even do another check on, how did our hunting season look to make sure we weren't over harvesting our birds in comparison. So we're always checking that. This is a terrifying graph to turkey hunters, but I promise it's counterintuitive, but nobody panic. Turkeys are not going off a cliff. So in 1990, right after we started this survey, we estimated that there were 28,000 turkeys in North Carolina. In 2020, that number has increased nearly tenfold, although our reproduction has been declining through that same time period. That's counterintuitive, but we're going to try and walk our way through. It's a little complicated. Hopefully, I'll make sure it's clear. So, there are very few turkeys in 1990, which means the hens, they get to choose the primo nesting spots, the best place where they get to be successful. So many of them are successful, and they all have poults, and they raise their poults into adulthood. So then there's more and more turkeys. Now, this poults per hen number that I'm showing, it basically is the total number of poults seen divided by the total number of hens seen. So if there's only a few hens and they all had lots and lots of poults, that's a very high poults per hen number. Well, as we get more and more adult turkeys nesting, we're not making more premier nesting spots. In fact, there's probably less as, more and more people come to the state and it develops. So now turkeys are having to make choices. They're going to have to nest in a subpar location, which means her nest is more likely to be predated and fail. So now we have a lot more turkeys on the landscape who didn't have a successful nest, but we probably have the same amount of turkeys successfully raising a nest. So we have same number of poults and more hens available. So that number goes down. So, counterintuitive, but short answer is low number of turkeys, no competition for great spots, very successful nesting. Current day, lots of turkeys, high competition for premier nesting spots, lots of failing on nests, so not nearly as successful on that poult per hen is the basic summary. Hopefully that wasn't too complicated. I know it's counterintuitive there. All right, so monitoring, while we do a lot of it, it can't answer all our questions. So we have to answer the last few of those questions through research. And boy, did we do a big one recently. So in 2020 through 2024, we conducted the largest statewide turkey research in North Carolina by far, and probably was one of the largest in the country. It might have been, except several other Midwestern states combined into a big project, so they might beat us, but we are definitely up there. So we did 3 years of field work in all 3 ecoregions of the state. So this was in Duplin, Sampson, and Bladen County, in the coastal region, Moore County in the Piedmont, and Madison, Yancey, Mitchell, and McDowell County in the mountains. And we had so much data, it took us 2 years to analyze it all. So, like I said, largest ever study. The National Wild Turkey Federation are our partner, and they were very generous and donated over $100,000 to this project to help us get it. This was over $1 million project. So we overworked our PhD student. He probably could have used a couple of master students to assist him, but he did great. And with a small crew of coordinating and staff, we captured over 700 turkeys. We located over 400 nests and then took nearly 5,000 disease samples for these turkeys. So we captured them, gave them a fancy piece of jewelry. They got a nice backpack transmitter that basically told us where they were all going, took some blood samples, and then we swabbed them on both ends for things, for diseases, because we really wanted to know all about the turkey, and we wanted the turkey to tell us all about them. So some of the things, we got so many different results. I'm only going to do a couple highlights. But one of the big questions we had was nest timing. You know, we go from 0 feet elevation to 5,000 feet elevation. And we wanted to make sure that our spring turkey season occurs during breeding time. So that was very important to make sure that was it. So we found that turkeys did not care what the weather said. It could have been 70 degrees, green off 2 weeks ago on the coast. It could be 30 degrees and snow on the ground. As long as they hit a certain amount of daylight, they were going to breed. So they could care less. So we found that on average, hens in North Carolina lay their first egg on April 1st. This varied only by a couple days every year in each region. So they were pretty consistent, pretty much telling us daylight's what's triggering them, which meant that they all started starting incubating their eggs on April 24th. This is extremely important to us. And in fact, we tweaked our spring season start date to make sure that we don't open a regular spring season before April 11th. Because our season's very front loaded. So we wanted to make sure that they all had a chance to breed before we started taking out large sections of the male population. We found that, you know, nesting and brooding survival, the reproductive portion, the thing that makes sure we have more turkeys, varied greatly among years. And we don't really know why, and nobody really does. But we figure on average about 1 in 4 nests will successfully hatch. And of that 25%, only about 1/3 of them will reach 28 days. Those poults will reach 28 days. So it's a very low number of turkeys surviving, which makes me impressed that we haven't any turkeys at all, yet alone how successful they did. So it is a very hard life. And to give an indication of this wide range, it was more in 2020, our first year of this study. It was a very poor reproductive year. None of the hens we tracked successfully raised a brood to 28 days. So we had 0% reproduction in our study. The next year, same sites, nothing changed. We had 40% success rate. So there's something happening in the wild that we don't know, but nothing changed that much and radically in a year that caused them to increase that much. So there's still mysteries out there. But we did know that turkeys who nested in areas with greater concealment, who had a lot of that shrubby, woody understory, were likely to be more successful. They were also likely to be more successful if they were near shrubland or herbaceous land cover, or things we typically associate with the brood cover for the young broods. So good herbaceous understory to nest in, close to brooding cover, equaled more likely to be successful in reproduction. We also learned that our nesting and brooding cover is limited across the landscape. If I tell people, think of premier quail habitat and what our that's great brooding habitat. And if you know anything about our quail population, they've been sinking like a lead balloon. So that kind of tells you how our turkey brood and habitat is on the landscape. Scant and limited. Another way to put it is good quail habitat is pollinator plots. And we all know how limited pollinator plots are across the landscape. So we, of course, promote more understory in forests, more that shrubland and herbaceous cover to help create that nesting and brooding cover. And that is incorporated through disturbance and management practices, such as thinning your trees to allow more sunlight to hit the ground, prescribed fire, disking herbicide to disturb the soil and stimulate more seed growth. So covered a whole lot of topics in a very short period of time, but we've come a long way in a few decades. We went from the turkey population being very scary low in North Carolina through massive habitat destruction and unregulated hunting to restoring them. It was a very long process, a dedicated process through the agency, so many times, countless hours, have been spent trying to restore this turkey. We learned through lots of trial and error. We took science and applied it. We took a hypothesis, tested it, said this didn't work, find a new hypothesis, and moved on. So we applied the scientific method. We managed to successfully restore them, and we continue to track and closely monitor their populations and continue to answer questions through research still to this day. All right, so thank you very much. So the bag limit currently for the state is a 2-bird limit, and it has been that way since the 1970s. And I will say, turkey hunting is not a very successful game. About 3/4 of our hunters that go turkey hunting go home without a turkey. And of those, only about 20% will harvest 1 bird, and a lucky 5% will max out with 2 birds in the state. So it's a challenge for our turkeys.
Is that 2 birds per season?
That is 2 birds per season, and they're only allowed 1 bird per day. Yes, there is. We estimate, I think we just got a new estimation that there is, I think this number is probably a little high, but about 150,000 people go out turkey hunting each year. Yes.
The white-tailed deer population help or hinder wild turkey population?
The decline of white-tailed deer can help turkeys and can hinder them. It depends. If a turkey population or a white-tailed deer population is at carrying capacity, which means they're a steady population, they're not overpopulated, it is pretty on par. They use a lot of the same habitats and they don't really compete too much. If a turkey or a deer population is overpopulated, they're overbrowsing that, particularly that understory level, that can be detrimental for the turkeys. Yeah.
When you said that the improved success rate was around 33%, is that the whole brood, or is that like problem brood?
So when I mean a successful 33% brood rate, I mean that of all the broods we had, 30% of them at least had 1 poult make it to 28 days. So it's not even a full brood because, they could hatch 12 and very quickly be down to 2 birds. And so that success rate, again, it's hard to balance. It's a low number and it's not all the birds.
Are they protected? Do they try and protect the brood? Do they fight at all?
Yes, so a hen is very protective of her young in a nest. We have videos of them where a raccoon will go and try and get to a nest and she defends her nest, as well as she may attempt to distract predators and by pretending she's injured, very similar to killdeer, broken wings sort of thing, to distract predators and try and convince them to pay attention to her and not her brood.
Do hens, when they nest, do they try to have a certain distance from one another?
Hens, when they do nest, they do like to be spaced out. They get very secretive. Even those that have imprinted on humans, around nesting time, they don't like anyone around them who they've imprinted, and they definitely try and space themselves out so they're not all in one area. And that's more of their personal. I don't know if there's a set distance or anything, but they definitely do prefer to have their own bubble. Yes.
like we just said, realize that turkeys imprint on people, but that makes a lot of sense. I'm from Michigan and there's a part where people feed turkeys.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, hopefully that doesn't happen here, but can you speak a little to kind of the impact that might have on the turkey population?
So feeding turkeys definitely has a big impact on them. One is, the big thing is you habituate them so they lose their fear of humans. Turkeys are bigger in real life. They stand about 3 feet tall. So they are slightly intimidating for folks, especially, if they're maybe not a little frailer, not stable on their feet, like my mother is, that can be quite scary. Otherwise, they can be quite aggressive in the springtime. They're trying to figure out, are you more dominant than me? So if you're backing away, you've just told that turkey, you're more dominant than me, so he's going to bully you now. So it's definitely a big thing. Another big thing we often don't consider, and I'm actually working with our fur bearer biologist, is we put a lot of food on the landscape for deer hunting, corn, baiting. We do that for deer and bear. It's pretty common. But a very common thing we see is a lot of other species use those bait piles for food, like raccoons, which are a big nest predator. So one thing it is we artificially inflating our raccoon numbers and hurting our turkey population indirectly.
The turkeys also are on people.
Turkeys will use the bait piles. It's not a particularly helpful food source, but they will take advantage of it.
Acorns and corn.
Acorns are very good. It's high in fats and nutrients. Corn for a lot of species tends to be like junk food. Bread for ducks, it's empty calories. So I don't particularly think they're great for turkeys, but I actually don't know if anybody's really examined it, since it's not typically a large portion of their diet. So in that period, the big thing is for Wayne's Bailey approach is the springtime versus the fall is a lot of times the fall hunting. If you look at science, the biggest impact to reproduction or turkey populations is female survival in the fall. So fall harvest means females mean there's nobody to lay eggs in the spring. So that has the biggest impact. Also in the fall it's a little simpler to hunt them because they're in flocks. You can break up a flock and call the flock back to you. And therefore they kind of are, again, pretty easy pickings. In the springtime, we're going against nature. We're trying to get the gobbler to come to us, the hen, when the hen typically goes to the gobbler. So it's a trickier and more of a complicated hunting process versus in the fall where there's a little easier to harvest, even though it is springtime and they are thinking of reproducing more than they are surviving. Yes.
They're in 49 states.
Yeah.
And Hawaii.
They are in Hawaii. They were introduced to Hawaii. They were not naturally found there. They were also introduced to a lot of our states, particularly, our northwestern states and some of our more northern states.
Do you know when they were introduced? Hawaii really picky about that.
Yeah, I don't know for sure. My guess would be probably 50s and 60s, maybe 70s. But yes, not any time recently. It was probably back when everyone was introducing things. It could have even been part of when we were starting, before Hawaii even joined us. That wouldn't shock me either.
To go back a question. So states where they have turkey hunting in the fall,
Mhm.
is that likely because they're overpopulated or?
So states that have turkey hunting in the fall, that's more of a traditional thing. So those tend to be our more northeastern states and some of our midwestern states. Virginia has that. We don't. It's kind of one of those things. Dog hunting is a very big, popular thing in the South. It's not so much in the Northeast, sort of thing. So it's all based on our various hunting traditions. I will say there are very few turkeys harvested in the fall. It is definitely a spring focus, heavy focus, and most of our hunters tend to go out and take a turkey opportunistically rather than going out to strictly fall turkey hunt.
I'll answer the last from online. Brenda asked, what can we do to help wild turkey in our state and our neighborhoods? I don't have any turkeys in my town.
No, that's a great question. So one of the biggest things we can do to help turkeys is to promote, like I said, those pollinator species in springtime. I'm a big thing against like mowing roadsides and stuff. So if I have my thing, don't mow your roadsides, don't mow ditches. Another good thing is if you're in maybe developments and your HOA or personally allow it, try and replace your turf grass with something maybe a little bit more wildlife friendly, whether they be more your meadows or have big patches of wildflowers or even clover. I know there's some concern on clover and stuff, but clover is certainly more wildlife and pollinator friendly than turf grass, which is a monoculture wasteland for wildlife.
Any other questions?
I think keep your hands warm and especially hard to fish.
Okay, so we do have a small impact of vehicular collision. It's not a major mortality point for turkeys, but there are a few that get hit by roadsides every year. I'd say they're less common than your vultures and your hawks, but I occasionally see one. But it all kind of, there's like one spot in Moore County that it's a pretty prevalent spot where they just seem to get hit, but they're pretty paranoid for a reason. And as they keep their legs and heads warm in the wintertime, particularly in our northern ranges, they'll go for dense covers and, your pines and your thermal area, but they also will prevent exposure, basically. So they'll just hunt into a small ball and kind of go like the mourning doves and just become a round ball, limiting that skin exposure as much as possible. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a thing. And there's some of those extreme environments, it's a very thin line of preserving cover and then gaining enough food and energy to maintain body heat. So it's a fine balance. And of course, keeping their head on a swivel because they are a prey species. I know their biggest limitation is snowdrift. So if you have thick snow, they often will struggle with food and starvation because they can't get to the food under the snow.
Dog study turkeys for a specific reason. What's the catalyst for this role for you?
So the catalyst of how I got into this role. So when I did my undergrad, I worked 4 years doing temporary positions all across the state or country, working on various types of wild or bird species. I always was interested in birds. So I did, worked on marbled murrelets and piping plovers and worked in Hawk Mountain and all these different locations. And I really struggled with threatened and endangered species because it was very exhausting to me to get people to care about the species. And when I got into grad school, my whole grad school thesis was computer based. So I basically was data mining and dealing with a lot of data stuff. So I really learned I really liked big data sources and messing with data. And so that kind of fell into game bird species where I had big long-term data sets, but I had immense scrutiny and pressure from the outside public asking questions all about the species. But it was because they cared about the species and that they were very passionate and they were going to judge every move I made. But that was because they cared and they weren't judging every move I made because I was hindering them or they didn't want this species there, sort of thing. So that's kind of how I fell into turkeys.
Well, thanks.
Thank you guys so much.
An article, I have a copy of Wildlife North Carolina, a handwritten article. This is a magazine that the Wildlife Commission puts out. If you want to copy, I see you brought, is this the same article as this one?
No, that what I brought is actually just the highlights of some of the research, that Research We Big project we did. It tells you some of the highlights and then the management implications for them. Because a lot of times I found people give results like they throw out numbers and then unless you're a turkey biologist or half the time the turkey biologist goes, what does this number mean? So I really wanted to make it simple for people. Here's what the data told us. This is what it means for you.
Somebody, won't rush up, like a bird. If somebody wants to take that home, by all means do. Yeah. Is there anything else, Dave, for you? I'll just, mention that for those of you online, hopefully you're still online. Next month, we'll have some talking about some more big birds. We have one of my colleagues from the North Carolina Falconry Guild is coming to talk about the history of falconry and some raptors in North Carolina. So, so come on out in December. And then it's mentioned there's the Christmas bird count coming up and some other activities which you can find out about on our website under the calendar. And then I guess that's it. So for those of us here, we're going to go eat cookies and cupcakes and other fun things. Thanks everybody for coming out and for joining us online. We'll see you next month.
John, do we have to
Yeah.
present